Hi, this is Catherine. This is Taking Tea with Catherine. This is from Simpson and Vale. It's the Bronte Sisters black tea blend. It blends black tea with fruits and maybe some flowery bits. And it's a nice tasting tea, but one of the reasons I chose it today is because I need to finish it. Like, I've had it and enjoyed it for a while, but it's getting a little old, so I should really get moving on it. I just have too many teas right now. Um, and that kind of fits in with the fact that I finished the biography of the Brontes in November. So I thought that would work for the November wrap-up, November 2021 wrap-up. So it was a good month for me reading wise. I completed 6 books. I DNF'd a number of them, but not those. And 4 of those books were nonfiction. So I thought it was a good balance because the years previous to that, I was a little more, I don't know, I was a little more strict with myself. Okay, you can't read anything but nonfiction. And then I realized I'm being a little, like I said, too strict, and it was making me a little anxious. So this balanced things out. I really enjoyed, for the most part, the nonfiction books that I read, some of which I'm continuing to read, so they won't be all featured here. And I also enjoyed the fiction books that I read for the most part, and it was a good balance. The only thing I was missing was reading Victorian or 19th century novels or thereabouts, which I did plenty of in October, but I really felt like I could have used a little more. So I'm going to try to have one going just constantly, I think, no matter what month I'm in. I think it's just good to have one to go back to. And I know I technically do with Dombey and Son, the famous Dombey and Son, which I'm still reading, but I didn't, really go to it in November, so does it really count? I don't know. But let's talk about what I actually did read. Not sure if this is going to come on my block. Nope. No sirens. Okay. So the first book I finished was Librarian Tales, Funny, Strange, and Inspiring Dispatches from the Stacks by William Ottens, I think his name is. It says Founder Librarian Problems Blog, which, there's a lot of books nowadays that sort of are derived from blogs or websites and everything, which I don't mind, but it is something to get used to almost, because you could tell a lot of source material comes from there, which isn't bad per se, but it's not, it's just different, I guess. So I actually got this book from checking it out at a library, and it's one of the bigger branches that is all gleaming and fixed and pretty, and it's got a cafe on the roof, so what a place to get a book about librarians and working at libraries. I always sort of wanted to work in a library, and then sort of not, because I know there's more to it than just talking about books and checking out books for people. I know there's a lot of different aspects of dealing with the public that I may not be up to. I mean, I could surprise myself. Also, there's a lot more schooling that is needed than I can imagine having. This writer definitely talked about all the school he went through, and it was a lot. He interviewed a few other people working at the library who had pretty decent positions, and a couple of them didn't really go to advanced school, higher education or whatever, but they started years ago, and things were different years ago. Like, I'm talking about 30, 40, maybe even more years ago. Things have changed a lot. But anyway, it was a good memoir. You do learn a lot about what it takes to work in a library in different parts of the United States, to be a librarian, to be a director in a library, the different activities that go on, also what was going on with libraries around COVID and when everything shut down. So that was kind of tacked on at the ending, because it was being published roundabout when, in 2020, so that works. And it's interspersed with different anecdotes and experiences and just expressions from different librarians, taken from, I guess, I don't remember if it was from Tumblr, I think, maybe. I still have a Tumblr, I keep forgetting that I do. So it was good, but I don't know, I can't explain what it was. It just didn't like overwhelm me with like, this is amazing. It was just, this is good. So I don't know. It was just okay. I don't know what else to say about that. I don't want to say I was disappointed, but I felt it was going to be a little more, I don't know what, heartwarming or something, but it just felt just okay. And I really know, I wish I could elaborate on that, but that's what I mean. There was just like a little something that was missing. But a great book to take out of the library. So, then I read, it was a reread. I am working on doing rereads as often as possible, like once a month or roundabout. And, or thereabouts. What's the word? And this I read probably, I don't know, 16, 17 years ago. I can't remember exactly when, but it made me aware of the Booktown Hay-on-Wye. And I know that's not the only one, but it was the first one I was aware of. And it made me want to visit it, and I never have subsequently. But perhaps someday. But I saw this book for a really good price in Book Off and thought, time for a reread. And that's Sixpence House, Lost in a Town of Books by Paul Collins. I still think it's a great, enjoyable book. I still had a great time with it. And it's kind of a memoir. It's about this family, Paul Collins and his wife and their young son, who moved to Hay-on-Wye in Wales from the United States, and try to find a place to live and, settle down in this town while they're there, and also visiting different bookshops and the people who work in these bookshops, dealing with them. I think the man's name was Richard Booth. I think he was the man who sort of founded and ran the town for a while, kind of. He died a few years ago, I think. But it's an amazing dream to have an entire town that is just devoted to bookshops and everything. I know they still have festivals and everything, but so if you're a bookish person, what a great place to choose to live, right? So it's the story of like getting used to certain things, maybe, the slight differences in cultures, living in the United States, living in Wales, and Paul Collins, I think both of his parents are from the UK, so he had like a dual passport or whatever, so I guess that enabled him to settle for a little bit. I don't know. I still haven't quite figured all that out. But it does, what I enjoyed was he really likes sort of random esoteric type books, and he will go into different shops and sometimes buy books and sometimes just share different parts of different passages of different books from Victorian times mostly. Strange, sometimes nature books, sometimes books about books even, sometimes books about history, memoirs, and they're all kind of random. And I like that. It was fun because you feel like you're hanging out with this person who's showing you all these odd bits of things. And so I did like that. The only thing I can say is I would have maybe liked a little more of life as a bookseller or life in a book town, with different people visiting. I realized, because I didn't realize this the first time I read it because, I didn't expect it. But I realized that this time, for some reason, I thought, sometimes you reread something and you forget that a book is a certain way, that it was missing a little more of that, like, experience of day-to-day life, actually being settled there or visiting there as a tourist. It was a lot about trying to settle in, which was okay, because that was his point of view. But it wasn't, it wasn't 100% what I had remembered. The one thing when I was reading other people's reviews, there was a little bit of some people were not happy with the way he talks about he and his wife and how they don't really drive a lot, compared to like a lot of Americans, whatever. And I think people thought that he was kind of, I don't know, being showy offy or sanctimonious or something. I don't know. As someone who doesn't drive, it doesn't drive at all. I think he at least knows how to drive it. But not having a car is possible in some places in the United States, just rarely, and it is something that you remark upon when you visit certain places in England where it's okay if you have a car, but it's not always necessary. There is a difference. There is a major difference, and it's not a better or worse thing. So I didn't understand where they were getting this tone from, but I guess people might get that impression from me too when I talk about how I don't drive. I really don't mean it to put down people who do, because I quite depend on them sometimes when I need to actually go somewhere in a car. Anyway, but I still think compared to Librarian Tales. I still think this was a pretty more enjoyable read for me. I still was very much drawn into the book, and I'm glad I got this copy of it and that I reread it. Now, the next book, which was the big boy, was the Brontes. Oh my goodness, holding it up. Wild Genius on the Moors, the story of a literary family by Juliet Barker. This is a tour de force. I don't even know what tour de force means. I think I could probably figure it out if I analyze the actual words. But it is a great book. And if you love the Bronte novels and want to know more about them, especially if you've read a good number of them, because this book does get into a lot of what happens in parts of the book, so you might be spoiled otherwise. The only book I haven't read of the Brontes novels, I think, is The Professor, which I don't care if I'm spoiled or not. I will read it someday. No rush for me. But, I don't know. It's just like there seems to be like no enthusiasm about that particular book, even when she was trying to publish it, Charlotte. So this book was really good. And in November I was in the last, third of the book, and it was probably the best third of the book. The first part of it, the first third, I would say, or especially like the first 200 pages, which focuses much more on Patrick Bronte, because it's about the entire family, is okay. But I had already read a book earlier in the year about Maria Bronte, the wife and mother of the Bronte family, and Patrick's wife. So I knew a little more about that part, and some of it, especially getting into, his education was interesting, and his career, and then really getting involved in the church that he was, part of. It was good, and the time period was interesting to me, but it didn't quite draw me in the way the last, maybe even half of the book did. Because then it gets into, then all the kids are born, and their upbringing, and of course the sad death of the older daughters, and then their, education, upbringing, including Branwell, who was so much more promising in the earlier years, and of the juvenilia, which I enjoy, but I wasn't quite as much in the mood for, so that didn't draw me in quite as much either. But it might to you if you're into that at the moment. But then when it really got going, I think once the earlier times of their life, and then once they start getting into the novel writing, I think that's when I started to really get interested, to the point that I didn't want to put it down, even though it's easy to put it down because it's so heavy. But and I couldn't really take it with me anywhere. So there is definitely something to say for e-readers in this instance, for sure. But it was a good book to, sort of curl up with at home. And it was amazing. There are so much about the, what happened to Branwell, which is kind of sad, but fascinating. By almost necessity, there's so much about Charlotte compared to almost anyone else, especially compared to the rest of the siblings, because a lot more of her writings, I guess, were preserved, her letters and everything. But there is, of course, the coverage about all of the sisters and their lives and their writing. And then, of course, it gets really tragic as everyone just starts dying. And then there's a while where Charlotte is the last of the children to survive. And she's got a little time going for a while where she is kind of spending time with other writers and other people in that society. And I found that, of course, interesting. And then, of course, she ends up dying. But this is not a spoiler. This is what happened in her life. And so there was a little while where her husband is a widower living with Patrick the father, who, I don't know how he outlived so many people, and lived to such an old age, and none of his children did. That must have been really hard for him. And it made me curious to read Elizabeth Gaskell's biography of Charlotte Bronte. But I'm glad I read this first, because now I know that some of her sources and some of her bits are a little not quite accurate. And I knew that already. And I love Elizabeth Gaskell, so I'm not knocking her really, but Um, I think she painted Patrick the father in a not as positive light as should have been. I'm not saying he was a perfect person, but I don't, considering all he did for his children, all the support he gave them, and you know what he was left with. Really, it is kind of sad to me that it would turn out that way. Uh, yeah. So like I said, this is not a book you want to read if you really just need to be cheered up. It is a bit, I wouldn't say a downer, but it is gloomy in that way. Not that every part of it is. I'm not saying the Bronte's life was one just completely depressing anecdote after another. Sometimes they had nice moments. Um and their fictional worlds were quite amazing. Um Especially in terms of Emily and how she really did live in her own world. Uh and I often wonder if she would have lived into her 30s and onward, if that would have continued with her or not. There's just so much potential there, and of course Branwell's falling apart in so many ways uh, is something. I mean, it is kind of painful. The author Juliet Barker, I think it feels like she doesn't quite like Charlotte at times, especially as in the earlier parts of the book. Um, when Charlotte is left alone, I feel like she's a little more sympathetic about her. I don't know, but I don't feel like she hated Charlotte, but she was very, in a lot of ways, critical of her. But I don't know. And then, of course, it gets into one of her best friends, Ellen Nussey, Charlotte's best friends, but she was friends to the whole family, really, who held on to a lot of correspondence, and that was used as a source for Elizabeth Gaskell's book. And what went into it, a little bit of a spitefulness, I think, on Ellen Nussey's part, but I also understood why she felt the way she did in certain ways, whether it was right or wrong. You know, being sort of like uh, so close to the Brontes, and then suddenly being shafted once Charlotte got married, and then what happens? You know, you sort of, yeah. I kind of understand why she reacted the way she did. I know I'm getting into things that you probably know if you haven't read the book or any Bronte biographies. Sounds a little random, but definitely, if you have any interest in the Brontes, this is the book that you should get into. And you know, if the early parts don't interest you as much, I could be wrong. That might be your favorite part, but just bear with it. It gets better, and it gets sadder. But you know, what are you gonna do? Now, another book that is kind of a memoir, and also just beautiful book to look at, was a book by Susan Branch, which I had read another book of hers about her visiting England, and I thought, okay, that's great, but I meant to read more of her books, and then I finally decided to do so. Martha's Vineyard, Isle of Dreams, by Susan Branch. It is her story of her life after she and her husband split up in the early 80s, and she was going through the whole divorce. And she grew up in California and just felt a need to escape. So she went to Martha's Vineyard and got a house. And a lot of the book is about her just getting used to living on her own and making this house a home, and getting to know the neighbors, and acquiring cats, which I found relatable, and cooking, and drawing and painting, which became her kind of thing. So this is like what her books are like. Handwritten pages with all kinds of illustrations prepared by her, and sometimes including, I feel like the same page I opened up to the last time I held this book open. I could be wrong. But anyway, so I'll show you something else. Some more photographs that she'll also include. So it's kind of like a memoir, scrapbook, cookbook, blog in one, sort of. And so it covers a good portion of the 80s as she comes to her own, you know, outside of her marriage, and comes to, you know, figure out her place or whatever. it sounds kind of, inspirational, but yeah, I thought it was an enjoyable book. And it is also interspersed with recipes, which I do like. Not that I've made anything of the recipes, but some of which I could actually use. So it was cool. And it was cozy, even though there were sad parts. There were definitely some parts that were not, or a little bit stressful. But generally, there is that feeling of just, I don't know, savoring life a little bit, enjoying things, and I don't know, coziness. And we can all use a little more of that, right? So those were all the nonfiction books I read, and here are the 2 fiction books I managed to fit in November. This was part of an ongoing read now. It's the first book of the Ian Rutledge series, who is an inspector. This book is completely beat up. It was the last copy the library had, which it actually says here. So this is a test of wills. I can't wait to bring this back to the library because it's just so trashed up looking. By Charles Todd, not Charles Todd. Charles Todd. So this introduces us to Ian Rutledge, who had already been a policeman, who had already been a detective, but he joined up in World War I and had a lot of not great experiences there, and especially one with a person named Hamish, who ends up being his constant companion during apparently the whole series, in which this person he sees him wherever he goes, and he's always talking to him, and he's trying to hide the fact that this guy is like, just there, kind of haunting him. He's got some kind of like PTSD, where that's his version of it, I guess. So I'm wondering how that's going to work for the rest of the series. But they also encounter other people who had just come out of the war and how it affected them as well. But there's a colonel who gets shot, and he was pretty well liked, so it doesn't make sense why, like, who would kill him. So he goes into this town and meets all these different people and has quite a struggle trying to figure out what happened, and then eventually, of course, it gets solved. And the pacing was a little weird, how it happened, how it went down, I guess, but it was still, I thought, quite enjoyable, but not like in a, sorry for that funny sippy noise, not in like a cozy mystery way, but in a I don't know, a little bit of psychology, a little bit of just all these different people and what their motives could be. Yeah, I liked it. And I was saying that I don't remember reading a lot about post World War I experiences, but then I realized all these different examples, all these different books that I have read, and I said, I really gotta get a better memory. So I'm looking forward to reading the second book, which I will be picking up quite soon. It was in my TBR that I did very recently. Last but not least, was kind of historical fiction that I've been trying to get to for a while, because I've had it out from the library for a while. Now I can return it because I finished it, and that's The Personal Librarian by Marie Benedict and Victoria Christopher Murray. This is them. So kind of a co-write. Is that what they call it? Co-write? Anyway, I read Marie Benedict's book earlier this year, The Mystery of Mrs. Christie, which maybe I should have read in December, because it's about when Agatha Christie went missing for a number of days in December. The novelized version, but what I guess what Marie Benedict thought happened during that time. It didn't involve aliens and bees at all. Doctor Who reference again. This is about Bella de Costa Green, who was J.P. Morgan's personal librarian, and more than that, really, like assistant curator. She put a lot of what is the current Morgan Library together, and I have visited the Morgan Library. I haven't been there in a few years, and with everything with COVID, I just haven't gone over there in a while. I'm kind of hoping to go back soon. I might be able to make that work. It's only free on Fridays, so it's like, and I like to go when it's free, but then it's crowded. Anyway, the Morgan Library is amazing. There are collections of books like the Gutenberg Bibles and early printings, which, as a book lover, not just a reading lover, but a book format lover, was something I found amazing. So I've been there a number of times and saw that and loved it. and there's a lot of beautiful paintings, different types of artwork. And last time I went, there was something about, there was a whole like activity where you could write letters and stuff, and they provide all kinds of postcards and stationery and stamps even, and I had a lot of fun doing that with my friend, and just encouraged me to write more letters again, which I'm not tired of doing really. But this doesn't just talk about what's in the library, which if you are ever in New York and you get a chance to visit, I do recommend it. It's pretty cool. Similar in some ways to the Frick collection, but its own flavor, you know? These Gilded Age, very, very rich people were able to collect art in ways that I can't even imagine. Whew, like their house became a museum. How? Anyway, and not like in the Addams Family way. But Bella DeCosta Green, so she was hired, which was already kind of amazing because she was a woman. Just that in itself was groundbreaking. But she had a major secret, which in those days you just did not want to say, because that could have ruined your career and your family's life. Which was that she was passing. She was white passing. She was part white, but she was black. But at least, her parents were of African American heritage, and but she could pass as white. I've seen pictures, and I can see that, but I'm also like, but I'm not a judge. I'm really not a judge. The point was that her original name was Belle Marion Greener, I think. So she changed it ever so slightly. Her father was, I think, the first black man to graduate from Harvard. Yeah, I believe so. So she, there were some, amazing accomplishments in her family, but they slipped into Costa because she claimed to have a Portuguese grandmother to explain the slightly olive-skinned tone that she had. So this book is fiction, a fictionalized account of her life and career, how she got as far as she did, and her love for art and literature too, but it was more about art, I think, really. And how she found her way into this position and how she kept it for so long. She kept it for years, well past J.P. Morgan's lifetime, and then into his son Jack's lifetime as well. And how she had to constantly hide who she was and be careful not to let slip. And then, of course, it gets into a certain relationship she got into, which wasn't my favorite part of the book. I understand how it affected her life, but I just wasn't really into that bit of it. But and also just getting involved with other people who were involved in rights for women, the vote, and all that sort of thing. So it was a great portrait of that time period, like I said, kind of the Gilded Age, going into World War I again, and into the 20s mostly is what's covered. So definitely an interesting person and an interesting time. I did enjoy the book, except I just wasn't really into the intimate scenes. Just that's not my cup of tea. But definitely, if that sounds like your thing, then that's your book. And if that sounds interesting, definitely do try to get to the Morgan Library, because if you ever get to New York, because it is fascinating and fun. So, this is a long video. So that's everything I read. I usually break it up halfway in the month, but this time I decided to do the whole shebang. So enjoy. If you're still here, let me know if you've read any of these books, what you thought of them, perhaps, maybe what you read in November. And I'll be looking for wrap-ups from my fellow, content booktube creators, etc. I thought November was a good reading month, even with all the DNFs that I had. So, and now on to December. This is Catherine, taking tea with Catherine. Have a lovely tea and book-filled day.